Air raid sirens, meanwhile, are ringing out in Ukraine today as Russia fires more rockets at Kyiv and other cities. This as Ukrainian President Zelensky is expected to address the G7 nations virtually today in an emergency meeting. That's happening later this morning. That following a deadly day of Russian strikes yesterday. Joining me right now is Fox News senior strategic analyst, chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, great to see you today. Thanks very much for being here.
Delighted to be here, Maria.
What would you like to see out of this emergency meeting later today?
Well, certainly I want to see the complete support and commitment to President Zelensky. I mean, his ambition here is to retake the territory that Russia is occupying and to drive them out of Ukraine. That is what he is attempting to do, and he is beginning to succeed at that. We've all seen the territory that he's just retaken, and Putin has come to the conclusion, given that the current forces that he has in Ukraine, he cannot defeat the Ukraine military. So what you're seeing before your eyes here is his attempt to defeat the Ukrainian people. He's attempting to crush their will and their support. And obviously, when he fired 84 missiles on Monday morning and 24 drone strikes, that was a huge step in that direction. And he's focusing on critical energy infrastructure because he knows winter is arriving, and he wants to shut down the electricity and the other systems that are certainly supporting the Ukrainian people during the wintertime. That is his objective. He's focusing on civilian population. That is a war crime in of itself. We're not surprised by that, but we continue to see the values and moral corruptness of Putin firsthand here. The Ukrainians are not going to give in to this at all, and they are steadfast and resolute in their determination to get their people back and their country back.
Yeah, steadfast and resolute. It's incredible, the courage of the Ukrainians, General. But, I mean, Russia is doing this resumption of strikes, a bombardment. You just noted what happened on Monday. And yet we keep saying, oh, the army is, you know, their military is not, you know, what they thought it was. And yet they're creating death and destruction every day. Where is this going?
Well, the strategy, clearly what Russia wants to do, obviously, is take more territory in Ukraine. But they've been stopped cold at being able to do that. They have no forward operational momentum whatsoever. And credit the Ukrainians for achieving that. What the Ukrainians need is more equipment. And they're going to put on the table, he needs air defense systems to protect these cities. The Ukrainians claim that they shot down half of the drones and the cruise missiles that attacked him in that large-scale retaliation attack by Putin. But they need more of that. And I met with the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States and her defense attaché on Friday, and they said that in spades to me about the need for air defenses. They also want something called the Army's Tactical Missile System, which is referred to in its acronym as ATACMS. It goes 200 miles. HIMARS goes 50. And what the Russians have done is they're keeping a lot of their equipment now out of the range of HIMARS. And what the Ukrainians want to do is obviously be able to reach that kind of equipment and those supply and ammunition dumps to fulfill their objective, which is retake territory that the Russians are occupying and free and liberate the Ukrainian people in those territories. So they're going to he'll put on the table a request for items. And also, he doesn't want any of the European support buckling as the winter approaches here. And obviously, there's going to be energy shortages, and some of the people will certainly suffer through that. He needs them to stay supporting him in terms of sanctions and also in terms of equipment and munitions.
Yeah. And China is supporting him. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, along with the executive chairman of Strive Asset Management, Vivek Ramaswamy, are out with a new op-ed in the Journal. It's titled, China's Threat to Taiwan. Semiconductors, they write, quote, no matter how it is achieved, the annexation of Taiwan would spell disaster for U.S. interests. If the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company cannot produce chips, the global economy will tank. General, you and I have spoken about this in the past. What's your take on protecting that flow of semiconductors and stopping China from upsetting that?
Yeah, well, certainly Taiwan is a high-tech platform, to be sure. Semiconductors is their #1 technology that they have an advantage over the rest of the world. 50% or more of the semiconductors are made there, but 90% of the advanced chips are made there. So they dominate the entire world. And if the company that produces them, TSMC, a war took place there, that would all shut down. It likely would tank the world economy and certainly America's economy as a result of it. And China would have a major problem themselves. So what Taiwanese recognize, they have a built-in shield for themselves in terms of their high-tech platform. But Maria, the D-Day invasion in terms of annexing Taiwan by China is what everyone focuses on. But it's not the most likely. The most likely is a quarantine or blockade where China takes control of Taiwan in terms of what goes in and what comes out without having to fire a shot. That would require Taiwanese to retaliate against them. And obviously, I think they would. I mean, that's what certainly their plans are. But that is the most likely, and that would preserve the high-tech industry inside of Taiwan and not destroy it as a result of an invasion. That, I believe, is the most likely action. Now, I don't think this is imminent, but after President Tsai's election in January of 24, the current incumbent, who cannot run again because she terms out after 8 years, I think then the window of vulnerability for China annexing Taiwan comes into play. Yeah. Because they know full well the United States is vulnerable. And we're trying to rebuild our deterrence capability, but we've got a long way to go, and it's going to take us a number of years. China is very aware of all of that. Yeah. And that's an incentive for them to do something. Real quick, because we got to jump, but General, you know who's not timing out? General Xi Jinping, right? I mean, on Sunday, they've got the Chinese Party Congress happening where it is widely expected he becomes dictator for life. Do they get more aggressive after the Party Congress? Not immediately after it, but I think the intimidation and coercion of Taiwan will certainly be persistent. Okay. But in terms of taking action, I think we got a couple of years. But there is a vulnerability. And listen, we have to really wake up. Yeah. This is a war that the United States would get involved in, and we can lose this war. Every time we play an exercise, that is the results we get. Yeah. And we've got to move with determination to get capability into the region and also take the lessons learned from Ukraine and apply it to Taiwan. Get them the equipment they need to defend themselves now. After the invasion, we're not going to be able to drive a train across a border and give them the equipment. That's not going to take place. Great point. Because obviously that's an island. General, great to talk with you as always. Thank you, sir.